Why do you like films that explore the theme of life and death?
I mean, I think the reason I got interested in making art in the first place is to deal with, fears and sort of existential ideas, and to get a better understanding of like what it is to exist, and what it is to relate to other people. And so, those kind of existential ideas are the things that drive me to create art, that I love in seeing in art, and the things that drive me to create art. So when I'm looking at films, I absolutely love thematically driven films, and the sort of meaning of life, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, and the idea of what we're facing. How do we face death? What does it mean to die? How do we experience that? Is really interesting topics to me.
Can you remember one of the first films that you watched that explored that? And you talked about music earlier and how sometimes music just would speak to you, whereas an actual conversation, you wouldn't receive that feeling.
Right. Yeah, I think one of the first films that really connected with me thematically, or sort of with this type of connection, is the film Phantasm. And it's really an exploration of grief, and it's really about this kid. It starts out, there's a young boy who lost his parents. The parents have died. They don't really get into it too much. That's what the starting point of the film, and it's about his kind of way of coping with that. And there are these kind of forces, and there's I would call it the manifestations of his like worries about what has happened to his parents, and those kind of manifest as this evil undertaker who's stealing souls basically and bringing them to enslave them in this other dimension. It's a very strange kind of concept, but it really spoke to me as a kid, because it's like, how would a little kid come to terms with the idea of like their parents no longer existing? What does that mean? What would they be afraid could have happened to them beyond just their non-existence? And I remember seeing that as a young boy, and I had no idea what to make of the film. First, I mean, I've seen it 100 times, and I still have no idea what to make of the film in some sense. But it really connected with me, and it was something that I remembered after for a long time. I wanted to kind of live in that world and kind of explore it in my mind in a way that I had not done with other films. There are films that I revisited as a kid, like I loved, Star Wars or something, but it never connected with me in that type of way.
Do you remember who introduced you to that film?
I think I saw it on TV. I just, I loved watching, weird horror movies, monster movies. I loved staying up late and kind of looking at the channels. And my parents were mostly tolerant of me being a weird kid and doing all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think I just ended up seeing it, on TV. And then later, one of my close friends and we basically just spent every day going to the video store and like looking through the horror section and the kind of cult movie section to find, what is the strangest looking thing that we can find. And I definitely revisited Phantasm and the other films in the series as part of that process.
What are the complex questions about life and death?
Right. I mean, I think ultimately we're all trying to find some purpose in life. We're all trying to find some way of understanding what we are, why it is that we experience the things that we experience, why it is that other people don't always kind of mesh with us, why we have trouble communicating these internal ideas, and ultimately, we all. I think that even people who say they don't fear it, and maybe they create stories that make them fear it less, I think we all kind of fear the unknown in general. And so, when we think about death, we don't really know what it feels like, what it seems like. The concept of life at all, I don't think we really understand. What does it mean to be sentient? Does it mean anything? Are we just basically, machines that function? Are we the same as like a rock, essentially, but we sort of have these functions, these chemical functions that sort of make us perceive ourselves as something more meaningful, and those are all things that I think are pretty universal to people. I think everybody kind of explores those ideas, and so for me, I want to be able to relate to people in our understanding of those ideas, and I think some people approach that through something like religion or other kinds of explanatory approaches to it, where they say, here's what happens. Like, this is what happens when you die. This is here's how you were created. Here's what life means. This is, here are the rules. But none of that ever connected with me. So, I'm looking for something that's different from that. And I find that the abstraction that's presented in film and in storytelling is a really a great way for me to explore that.
What is theme?
Theme, I think, is the underlying idea of a film. And I know that idea sounds vague, but I think the underlying way that film connects to us in an internal, meaningful sense. And I often talk about theme and thesis, like they're sort of intertwined. And I know some people will kind of divide them in a more strict way, but I think of theme as this sort of underlying idea, and thesis is what the filmmaker or the storyteller believes about that idea or wants to express about that idea. And I love the approach to filmmaking or to storytelling, where you say, what is the concept that I want to explore? What is the idea that I want to explore? What is the fear that I want to explore? What is the experience I want to explore? And then what is it that I want to share about my own thoughts on that experience? What is it that I want to share about my fears related to that experience? And that's going to be my thesis. And when I'm writing a story and I have characters in the film, maybe those different characters, they all should be related to that theme. Their behaviors, their kind of feelings, their approaches to things, and the plot arc as well should all be related to that theme. And they may have all different ideas about that theme. They may have all different manifestations of that theme. And ultimately, me as a storyteller, I think if you're doing a good job, you're siding with somebody, or you're saying that you have some belief. You're not just saying, here's a bunch of stuff to think about. You're saying, here's a bunch of stuff, and here's what I think about that. And that's sort of the thesis approach to it. And that's how I like to structure stories.
Is theme a big part of your writing process?
It's a very big part. I think it's the most important thing. I think it's the part that meaningfully connects with people. I think if you're not writing for theme, I don't want to criticize writers too much, but I think if you're not writing for theme, all you're doing is emotionally manipulating people. You're just basically saying, I'm going to create characters that go through experiences that emotionally manipulate you, so you experience those emotions, empathetically or so on. But it doesn't really, to me, that doesn't really serve a purpose. What serves a purpose is causing the viewer or the reader, depending on the context, to be introspective about their relationship to that theme or that idea and their experiences with that. And then to be able to express to them what it is that I think about it, or what I'm maybe even not what I think, but what is most important to me about that theme or that idea. And I think that's a meaningful way, again, to connect with people and to have some kind of push and pull. And so ultimately the goal is that when somebody leaves the movie, if they watch a movie that you've made, they walk away with something to think about and explore and to make their lives better in some way.
How do you incorporate theme into stories?
Well, usually I start out with theme as at the ground level, at that sort of nugget level of storytelling. I think about what is the topic that I want to explore. So I know a lot of people are like, oh, I have this idea for a story. This is the character. This is what they do, so on. For me, it's more often like, this is a really interesting kind of topic. Now, this is the topic I want to explore. Here's what I think about it. Now, how do I create characters, and how do I create a story that help me to explore that? So maybe that's an opposite approach of many people who are like, oh, I've got this character, I'm going to put them in this world, and now maybe I'll think about a theme later. I'm more like, what is it that I want to say? Because to me, if I don't have something that I want to say, why am I making the movie, right? Why bother making a movie if you've got nothing to say? I guess if it's just revenue, or you're making a popcorn movie to get paid or something like that, that's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, if I'm creating something that's our kind of real creative art, I have to think about what's important to me at this moment, how do I want to express that, and then how can I build that from that idea. And so every character behavior, every character typically takes a different perspective on that theme. That's one of the approaches I have. I say, here's a character. How would this character relate to this theme? How would they behave in association with this theme? Here's another character. Maybe it's a contrastive character, for example. I mean, you might be a protagonist, antagonist, but it might not. It might be other types of characters. How do they relate to this theme? How would they behave in association with that? And now, what is the story that allows me to kind of go on a journey with those characters that reinforces whatever my thesis is associated with it? So again, that the beginning and ending are really important to me because you have to tell the audience where you're starting, place everything, set it up there, and then at the end you have to drive home what is the thesis, what is the idea that you want them to walk away with. And some of that is maybe because I come from academic writing, so I'm used to the idea of writing kind of a persuasive academic article, and it's really that same type of approach. You're trying to tell somebody, here's what I believe in the scientific realm, here's the evidence of that, and then here's the conclusion.
So a symmetrical story within a certain theme is more important to you than just, this is a great character and I wonder what would happen if A, B, and C entered their life.
Yeah, it really does not. Characters don't interest me in that way, typically. I very rarely am thinking like, oh, here's a character I love, like what can I do with this character? And I know some people approach writing that way, and there's, that's totally fine as well. But yeah, no, I'm rarely interested in character. I think character drama is the most boring part of movies. And I don't like watching movies that are driven by character drama because I feel like, again, it's just manipulative. It's just sort of like if I want the viewer to experience something, I can throw a character in and I can make them sad, or I can give them heartbreak, or I can give them illness. And that to me is just an emotional manipulation. It's not a meaningful kind of storytelling. And sometimes people like those kind of movies, and sometimes I like those kind of movies where I'm like, I'm just gonna have an empathetic experience with a character. Totally fine. But for me, the better art, or the more meaningful, long-lasting art, is one in which the character serves that theme. The character really, they're a manifestation. They're a symbol. They're sort of a metaphor for something else that you're trying to explore.
Is there a way we can further pin down what theme means? Is there a movie that we could think of that explains theme?
Sure. I mean, I think every movie has themes, whether it's intended or not. First of all, so some writers will say, "Well, I didn't write with any themes in mind." I think there's something innate and something that you're always doing as a creator, as a storyteller, where themes are gonna emerge because your subconscious ideas are gonna emerge. One movie that I was watching recently, again, and revisiting again for the first time in quite a long time, was The Exorcist. And I think The Exorcist is a really interesting movie because I remember it, when I thought about it as when I experienced it as a younger person, I thought, oh, this is a story about a girl who's possessed by a demon, and this stuff happens, and it's really about like that possession. But now watching it, I had a completely different experience. I don't think the movie is actually really much about Reagan, about the girl at all. The first section of the movie is really about her mother's experience with her child, and about the helplessness of seeing somebody you love go through something that's difficult, have a health issue. And so it's really exploring this idea of like, how does a mother deal with not being able to help their child in distress? And the emotional arc really happens with the mother, not really with the child. And then, we start to see the movie kind of shifts and builds like kind of a layered thematic idea where we see the priest starts to look at what it means to have faith. What does faith mean? Can you really maintain faith in the face of the most terrible thing? Seeing a child being brutally treated this way, and ultimately he has to kind of make a sacrifice. He has to accept his fate in order to show that he holds faith enough. He holds faith enough to sacrifice himself, to ultimately succeed in what he believes in. And so really it's, the thematic ideas there are really, again, about the mother's love for a child and the helplessness associated with the illness, and the priest basically looking at doubt.
Right, and being taken seriously too, because
Right.
she had a lot of issues getting people to believe
Well, that's
her.
a big thing, yeah, and it really, I mean, we have so many, people now who have so many struggles with the medical system, where they go in and the doctor says, "Nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you." So yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really, really strong. I mean, I don't even call it a metaphor. It's literally presented in the film. But yeah, it's a really, really interesting exploration of like what it means to have an illness that's not really visible, because the doctors can't measure it, right? They're trying to measure it. They're like, we tested her, nothing's wrong with her. None of those tests are going to show that there's like a demon possessing her, right? So, yeah, so I think that speaks to a lot of people as well. It's a very rich movie. I mean, I think it's a really fantastic movie, and a lot of people sort of think of it as like, oh, it's a horror movie, it's pretty good, whatever. But I wouldn't even. I mean, it's a horror movie because these are all horrific ideas. I mean, the mother, dealing with their child being sick, the medical system refusing to do anything about a sick child, fighting with your own faith and self-doubt. These are all horrific ideas, and these are all kind of universal existential ideas as well.
Do you think movies from the past, maybe 30 years, were more theme-driven?
I think especially when you look at films in the 70s, I think they were really, really heavily theme-driven. And I think you had a lot more of the sort of flexibility within the studio system, where it was a little more auteur feeling, where filmmakers were allowed to make things that were a little unusual, not necessarily structured in a way that we can break down as much as we break down kind of modern films. All kind of conform a little more to a very specific structure. And so I think when you look at those, I think they all really feel the thematic or the thesis driven elements of those films a lot more than you do in modern films. Now, that said, I think even my least favorite films, right, like the Marvel films and all these superhero films, they have themes. They absolutely have themes. They have themes about militarization. They have themes about the Superman versus Batman movie where they destroy everything. There are themes about like what is the collateral cost of fighting a war. There definitely are ideas there that are interesting, but I don't know that most viewers are taking those ideas home with them or relating them to something existential, the way that maybe a lot of the popular movies in the 70s really connected with people.